Welcome to the Sunday Superversive Livestream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with my co-host, Anthony Marchetta. Anthony, how are you doing today?
I discovered about 5 minutes before the stream that I apparently share a birthday with Father Gregory Pine.
Outstanding. All
Right?
right. Happy birthday. I think he was on our stream a while back.
He
was very
was,
tired.
yes. He was,
No,
but I was very grateful because he did anyway and didn't complain, but he was very visibly tired.
Yes. Actually, no, thinking about him, he would be an excellent guest to talk about the theology of nuclear weapons.
Actually, you're absolutely right, and I'm going to send an email after the stream is over and see if he's open to it.
Yeah. And we'll considering his schedule, we'll keep it pretty open. So it might be an unusual time, fair listeners.
I'm sure he's incredibly busy.
Yes. But more to a direct point. So the reason why we're talking about nuclear weapons is because down the line of Chainsaw Man and Yoro's declaration of love for America. And let me tell you, Anthony, I love that psycho right back. There has been an absolute explosion of pictures of her in the American flag bikini, and I am here for it.
I always thought that it was because, I always thought that the reason that the conversation heated up again is because it was just VJ Day. Like, we just passed it.
That too. But there's a mix of things. Like, they were already talking about it before.
Because of Chainsaw Man.
Yeah, because of, like, that it entered into the meme discourse. So the reason why we're making a stream about it is because it was revealed to me something that I had no clue was a thing, and that is the Catholic Church has a negative opinion of the strikes on Japan.
Did you actually not know that, or are you being sarcastic? I can't tell.
No, I didn't know that. So let me explain.
Fair.
Let me explain.
Okay.
So I knew that there was a negative opinion about the strikes on Japan because of Nagasaki and Hiroshima's Catholicism, which, quite frankly, I don't think was as much of a decision as people like to say it was.
I mean, I don't think that was why they did it. No.
Right. But, like, hold on. So it's like yeah, that was the how should I say, that was what I thought the whole issue was. But later on, in talking with you and others, I discovered that there was actual, like, theological reasoning to it. It wasn't just, they struck some of ours, friend-enemy distinction, hitting friend bad. That's what I thought it was before. And, as a evangelical Protestant of some kind or other, that doesn't affect me. It's meaningless.
Right.
Quite frankly, as a Missourian, as a proud, bloody Missourian, where the war of man against man has never ended, Harry S. Truman being a Missourian president, it is only right and just that a Missourian be the first one in the world to nuke an enemy power. This is my unfiltered, unironic opinion. Missouri supremacy, the blood will flow forever right into the corn. You'll see me sacrificing people on the steps of the Indian mounds around here very soon, I'm sure. But no, like, to get a more serious opinion though, what is this theological thing they have against nuclear weapons? Is it just an anti-war stance, or is it something more?
No, it gets pretty nuanced. All right, so let's start off with, when we are judging, the church doesn't really, you can't, like, make an infallible declaration about a particular act, if that makes sense. I'm trying to think of how to put this, and I'm having trouble explaining it, because, like, if any way I word it, I can immediately think of someone going like, no, here's a counterexample. But what I mean is, you could say, let's say this. You could say indiscriminately targeting civilians is inherently immoral, right?
Sure,
The
I
church
agree
can
with
say that. And the church has said that, and I agree with that with no reservations, right? What the church can't do is infallibly declare that this incident was in fact an example of that, because that's a declaration of fact, not on faith and morals. So that's the first thing to get in mind here. In other words, you can disagree about this particular issue without as long as the disagreement is not of church teaching, but of the facts on the ground, right? Like, you would need to dispute in this case that this was the indiscriminate targeting of civilians in the way that is condemned in documents. Like,
right.
one of them is called Gaudium et Spes, which doesn't matter, but you get what I mean.
Yeah. Which of
So
course,
that's the first thing.
Sorry. Which I will, of course, make a dispute later in the stream.
Sure. So I want to be clear about that. I'm trying to think of how to put this exactly. Therefore, so you get people like, I'm going to name names, but I'm going to be naming names very, very, very judiciously. I'm not going to. I'm going to try and avoid like going after specific people's arguments, but I will use them as examples of people who hold these positions. John C. Wright is a Catholic. John C. Wright has held in favor of the nuclear bombs. John C. Wright does not reject any of the church's teachings on the subject and never has, and could argue quite capably that he has not. Now, what you can do is say, if you still are arguing that these aren't, in some way a break in church teaching, you're absolutely wrong and that's insane. You could argue that, but then you're just making an argument for that. You get the distinction? It's subtle, but it's very important when discussing this. So with that said, this is why I worded it, the post you were talking about, I mentioned it on Twitter in a very particular way. There is no mainstream stream of Catholic thought that has ever come out in favor of the nuclear bombs. And this very seriously bothers me because I find the arguments against the dropping of the bombs, they seem ipso facto to me to be quite poor, right? Like, I go, oh, it's consequentialism. Well, no, it's not. It's way, way more like, consequences do matter when you're analyzing the results of an act, right? Like, I'll go through my reasoning, right? Consequences, when you're analyzing the results of an act, obviously consequences are a thing that you need to take into account. You can't divorce it from the act. Consequentialism is that consequences are the only thing or the primary thing to take. Whereas I would say, as somebody who is not a consequentialist, I don't even know what I would call myself, probably a deontologist if you really, really dug down, but I'm sure there's a term. But anyway, I would say that there are things where it doesn't matter how good the consequences would be, they are still inherently immoral. An example of this, of course, would be you can't rape people to death, even if that would, like, a warlord goes up to you and says, rape that child to death or I kill your village, right? You can't do it. It's an inherently immoral action. The only thing I could think of is maybe in this case, the person who was like being threatened to do this is not the one at fault, but the warlord threatening it. So perhaps that's not a great example. Perhaps a better example would be something like, all right, we know this person won't talk, but if you rape them, they probably will, or threaten rape and really mean it and start or something, right? Then they'll talk, and then you might prevent the bomb from going off. And I just think of a bomb like in a school building. That I would say you can't do that. That is inherently immoral, right? And there are certain actions that are in that category of inherently immoral. Okay, so is the dropping of a nuclear bomb an inherently immoral action? The answer to this is obviously not, right? And I'm not talking about the dropping. Keep in mind, I'm not on Hiroshima and Nagasaki yet. the dropping of a nuclear bomb is not inherently immoral, because you could drop it in an area with no civilians. You could drop it in an area where an army has mustered. You could drop it on a munitions factory, right? Or in the countryside and devastate the transportation infrastructure in order to win the war. None of these things are inherently immoral in wartime. So, and a nuclear bomb can be used for them just as much as a regular bomb can. So, okay, we know that the dropping of a nuclear bomb is not inherently immoral. So the sheer power of the bomb is not itself an argument against it. So how about dropping it in an area where civilians are amassed? Now, this is where things get complicated and where I'm not really convinced by a lot of the arguments against it, which is what makes me pause. Like, so the thing about Japan is that they were being ruled by a fanatical warlike cult, right? Like, this is fact. It is well known. It is historically documented. They were literally a death cult. Imperial Japan was probably the single most evil government in the world at the time. I would say more than the Nazis, for sure. And probably more than the Soviets as well, although the Soviets were close. But nevertheless, I would say Imperial Japan. Okay, so Imperial Japan is this demented and evil government, right? And they are a fanatical warlike cult that believed surrender to be like basically against their religion, is the best way to describe it. They wouldn't put it in exactly that way, but that's how they treated it. Yeah. So what do you do in order to end the war? Well, there was a Catholic philosopher named Elizabeth Anscombe who wrote an essay called Mr. Truman's Bomb. Elizabeth Anscombe was contemporary to the times. So this is not looking back and going like 2020 hindsight. She said this at the time, right? Her claim is that we should not have demanded unconditional surrender. That's what led to the situation, right? Is that we demanded unconditional surrender. I'm not convinced by this. I don't think it's a very good argument, because if you demand less than unconditional surrender from the Japanese, what they would have wanted was to retain control of territories in China with a promise that they would like not do anything, but a promise that would have been absurd to expect them to keep. Right? Like, you would have had to demand that they give up the territories in China. Granted, the Soviets did just invade in China, I suppose, so maybe you can make that argument. But even then, it's like, I don't know if that. That's another thing people say. Oh, it's really the Soviets' invasion that convinced them. I don't think it is.
No.
I don't think the Soviet invasion would have convinced them any more than. Or to put another way, if you think the Soviet invasion would have convinced them, then surely you believe they would have surrendered immediately after America invaded, right? Then why are you talking about that as being such a big loss of life? You obviously think that they would have capitulated immediately to an invasion. So that's not it, right? So both of these are things where you go, okay, so those are so that's an option I don't think is off the table. I actually do think you needed to ask for unconditional surrender. I get Anscombe's point, but to do less than that would be to condemn China to something like a genocide, right? Like, that can't be the answer. Okay, so what else could you do? Well, you could invade, but in that case, in what way is invasion substantially different than dropping the bombs? Civilians are going to be killed in an invasion. We know this because civilians would have fought. Japan was training the civilians to fight, right? So that's a problem. I don't really, except it would have been worse because also American soldiers would have died, not just Japanese. So that's not really a good answer either. You could blockade the islands. That's something that Colonel Kratman has brought up in the past as a distinct possibility, and starve them out. Is that less cruel than the bombs? I mean, the best I could say is, well, I think maybe you can make an argument for it. Like, well, at least you're giving them the opportunity to surrender at any point, so you're not really the one doing it. The ball's in their court, right? It's certainly not clear cut to me, because what you're doing is saying, like, I know you're going to starve a lot of people to death, and I'm okay with that, right? Like, maybe it's better, but if it is better, it's certainly not better by any, like, it's not a clear-cut issue, and it's an
Right.
awful thing to do regardless. So what's left? Well, conventional bombing isn't working. So why would the atom bombs work? I've seen some people go, well, the atom bombs wouldn't have convinced Japan because they weren't convinced by the conventional bombs. It did just as much or more damage. Yeah, but there's a big difference here. We did it with one bomb, a single bomb. And by the way, I do think that Nagasaki was necessary for Japan to surrender because we know that the war council's first thought after the bomb was, well, they might only have the one until the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. That's what really convinced Hirohito, because he's like, we don't know how many they have. Which, by the way, was exactly the United States' reasoning for doing it. Yeah. So, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the other thing is, like, were civilians being targeted indiscriminately at Hiroshima and Nagasaki? People have said yes, they were intended to kill the civilians. But we dropped leaflets telling the civilians to leave. Now, I don't know if that's enough to totally change the moral calculus of the act or not, but it certainly can't be nothing, right? Like, it has to amount to something when you're determining the moral calculus. And second, Hiroshima and Nagasaki did have significant war-making capacity. We intentionally didn't bomb Tokyo and Kyoto because, or at least Kyoto, we were bombing Tokyo. Tokyo we didn't bomb because there would be no point. So scratch that. But Kyoto we intentionally didn't bomb because we knew that would be a worse blow to Japan. So in a sense, like, we were being generous, and in that very specific way, right? Now, were civilians being targeted indiscriminately? I would say as far as I could tell, the answer to this is no, because we targeted them for their war-making capacity. The way that people go like, oh, well, why didn't we target the docks? Well, because the way that Japanese cities were set up wasn't like American manufacturing plants. They weren't as much of an industrialized nation. They were at best partially industrialized, right? And when you consider this, their war-making capacity was spread out throughout the city. Like, there is no one spot. Moreover, it's a nuclear bomb, like, when you're aiming it, it's going to destroy the entire city. That's how it works. That's the whole point, right? Like, so yeah. I don't think civilians were being targeted indiscriminately. I think civilians were in a city that was part of the war-making capacity of Japan. And moreover, these civilians were being trained to fight in the event of an invasion. I've seen people go, no, that's stupid. You can't just say because we handed them, like, bamboo sticks that they now count as soldiers. But we were going to invade. They absolutely would have attacked us. So I don't really know how they weren't soldiers. Like, well, what's your definition then, if not an enemy combatant that is willing to fight you? Like, no, with that said, there were babies in Hiroshima, but at that point, it's like, yeah, that's a tragedy, but we're trying to end the war with as little bloodshed as possible, and I don't really see another way. All of this is to say that you look at all of these different factors, and then I see people go like, no, it's evil, and then people just kind of, like, plug their ears. It's really weird to me, right? Like, they go, no, because we targeted civilians. Okay, but those cities had significant effects on Japan's war-making capacity. So it wasn't just that they had, right? Like, we weren't really just targeting civilians. And you go, yeah, no, we were evil. We targeted civilians. Did you know they killed Catholics in Nagasaki? Yeah, okay, there were Catholics in Nagasaki, but we were at war with a country. We weren't at war with the Church of Nagasaki. Like, I don't know what you want. Or you go like, no, they were targeting civilians. We dropped leaflets telling them to evacuate, right? That doesn't count. Why not? Because it doesn't. Okay. And then you go like, well, then what would you have done? And I've never really heard an answer. The only answer I've heard worth anything is don't offer terms of unconditional surrender. And I don't buy that, because then you're saying that because we're not willing to drop the bombs, Japan has carte blanche to genocide China. Like, that doesn't seem like it makes any sense. And the other thing that is very important to me here is that America is so often pointed as being like callous and evil for doing this, when as far as I could tell, these sorts of considerations were the things they were considering when they were considering the dropping of the bombs. Like, they were having discussions very similar to the one that I just had with you, right?
Right.
So I say all of this and I go, I'm really conflicted, because you go to like Venerable Archbishop Fulton Sheen. He's probably going to be a blessed one day and maybe canonized, right? Fulton Sheen was a radio personality. In fact, I think he was like the biggest radio personality in the country for a while. In America, he was very much against the dropping of the atom bombs. He considered it a crime against humanity, deliberate targeting of civilians in the way that Gaudium et Spes talks about it. As far as I could tell, like when the Vaticans talked about it, John Paul II, Benedict XVI, they have been very, very clear that they think that it was a crime against humanity. And some of them were contemporaries to the bomb, again, like Archbishop Fulton Sheen and the philosopher Elizabeth Anscombe. And the fact that it's so consistent and from like the highest intellectual levels of the Catholic Church makes me go like, what am I missing? Because it's hard for me to be like, no, it's, and the other thing is that this is an impossible conversation to have, right? Because I've never talked to someone who considers it like a fair point to disagree on. You know what I mean? Like, I've never spoken to someone who you go, I don't really agree with that. And I go, yeah, I can understand that. No, they go, well, then you're evil. And it literally, like, this goes for both sides, right? If you're in favor of the dropping of the bomb, you think someone's against it, you're like, oh, so you want American soldiers to die? Well, no, I don't want any of this, right? Like, I wish none of this were, but like we're discussing hard things. Or the flip side, like, oh, so you're okay with nuking civilians? Of course I'm not okay with it. Like, it's an awful thing that this happened, but like when you're dealing with Imperial Japan, you get forced to extremes, right? Like, and that's the other thing to me. It's like, we're not just dealing with anyone. We're dealing with one of the most evil civilizations in all of history. Like, there are things they did, and I think it was Unit 77 or something?
Unit 531.
Thank you, yeah. There are things there that we can't talk about on stream because they're so disgusting, they almost would make you vomit. Like, and that the Japanese are doing for literally no reason, except I wonder what it would be like if this happened to a human. And they were doing it to, Chinamen and Chinese babies that were created to be experimented on via rape. Like, this is the sort of evil that we're talking about here. We're talking about a fanatical death cult that would shame people into killing themselves for marginal gains in battle. That in a war that they are probably, of all the countries, even more than Nazi Germany, the most clearly in the wrong in. Like, there is nothing justifying Japan's presence in World War II beyond sheer naked power grab. Like, this is a truly despicable civilization. So when you go like, yeah, you're being forced to an extreme here. You're being forced to do something that is a very, very, very last resort. But if you are going to be forced to that extreme, Imperial Japan is the sort of place where you'd be forced to it. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer here. I don't really know. It makes me think I'm missing something because, like, there's no way that Fulton Sheen, Elizabeth Anscombe, John Paul II, Benedict XVI weren't aware of these arguments, right? So what am I misunderstanding? I'm not sure.
There's so you talked about a lot, and I'm just sort of like parsing it out for a second.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, there's a lot to talk about, but like, it's important that I get all of that out because I'm going through both why I'm struggling with this and also what the Catholic Church's position is, both like officially and unofficially. Again, you can't really be officially, quote unquote, against any act because, like, it could also, because it's about the facts on the ground, right? Is this the sort of thing that you claim that it was?
Right.
So,
and
there's that too.
Yeah. And it's okay. So just to make sure, like the Pope shares this opinion.
So I would be shocked if the Pope didn't share this opinion, because every Pope has shared this opinion since it happened, as far as I'm aware.
So the
I
Pope
mean, he
at
hasn't
the
spoken
time,
about it, but at the time, again, like, here's the thing. It's very rare that you'll get them going like, I think that this specific act was a war crime. Instead, what you'll get is, after it's out, a document saying, the indiscriminate targeting of civilians by nuclear annihilation is wrong. Gee, I wonder what that's in response to.
Right.
So you're reading between the lines a little bit.
Okay. No, I get you, and that's classic Catholic behavior. But okay, so like what I'm saying is it is guaranteed that the highest authority is against the indiscriminate bombing of civilians.
Yes.
Okay. So
I would go further than that. I would go so far as to say the indiscriminate bombing of civilians, in that they are targeted specifically to be killed, because they are civilians as a terrorist. Say that's basically an infallible declaration, and if it even needed to be, because I think it's just like drawn out from first principles, that's inherently immoral. And I agree with that, by the way. The question is if this act is a thing of that kind.
Right. So yeah. So of course there's some. I'm trying to remember what you said so we don't repeat ourselves a whole bunch.
Right. So my argument is that the dropping of the bombs, or at least I don't want to say my argument, but my reasoning at this point is that the dropping of the bombs was not indiscriminately targeted against civilians, but targeted against military installations in cities where civilians happened to live. But that the idea that we could wipe out a city in a day was definitely intended to be a factor that led to the faster end of the war. But I don't know if that's inherently immoral. I mean, clearly showing force is not inherently immoral. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I guess I'll go over things from my perspective, and sort of go from there. The bombing of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki was justified. While I meme Bloody Missouri, in reality, like you said, and I'm going to cover some of the same space, just because there's a whole lot of information and it's hard to not step on that. Is that there had to be a large enough show of force that the Japanese government and the coup by the Navy, I believe, Army and Navy officers, though somewhat unsuccessful, I would actually argue they were very successful because they kept a control of the spirit of the nation towards its end. Basically could not be cowed any other way. It had to be force, it had to be overwhelming force, and it had to be force that didn't involve human lives from the American side. In other words, they could freely use this force whenever they wanted. Nagasaki and Hiroshima were both military targets in general. They had factories in them, as well as
I believe
in them.
Hiroshima had shipyards.
Shipyards, thank you. So in other words, they were a legitimate military target. You had to break their ability to do it. People saying that, oh, you could have just starved out Japan. Well, no, Japan was pulling in huge amounts of resources from the raped Chinese. you couldn't really be sure of how much they were taking. Like, we can say we know exactly how much they were taking. We have the documentation. But at the time, you would not have the information necessary to make a perfectly informed decision. This is armchair generalship, mostly the fortitude of gammas. I would say somebody's trying to contact me. I would say I'm going to ignore them. I would say that. Did I forget a guest? No. I would say that yes, we are discussing Fallout in a way, Mechathos Shepherds. I would say that combined with the declaration that every citizen of Japan must defend the nation with everything they've got to the death is essentially a national suicide pact. In the same way that you would slap somebody who's trying to commit suicide, you may slap a nation by cowing it. There's like the terminal loss of life was greater through an invasion, especially if some little old lady's coming at you with her kitchen knife. There was an ultra right wing, political movement in Japan. They were well known for them, and they were in their primacy during that time, and very much before. All their novelists talk about it. It is the spirit of that age. So I would say that even though a lot of civilians suffered because of it, it is not a war crime, and it isn't, shall we say, an indiscriminate bombing of civilians. Now, if they had hit a target that didn't have dockyards, shipyards, factories, whatever, we could have a different discussion. But fundamentally, it seems that there's no question that there was military value lost when those cities were lost. And people talk about, production and stuff like that. Well, production doesn't matter if you don't have the manpower necessary to fill those tanks. Eventually you just run out of men. There is a future where the Soviets just run out of men. The difference is between the Soviets and the Germans, even though the Germans were running out of men, is that the Soviets simply did not care about tomorrow. Therefore, they could lose 1 million men in Stalingrad or whatever and continue to fight. In the same way, Japan was going to do that. So the question of theology, the reason why I'm interested in talking about this is that there is a spirit about nuclear weapons that is different than, shall we say, like a B-2 bomber or something like that, right? Like a bombing run on Dresden is bad, but it doesn't feel the same way as a nuclear bombing, partially because it is just one super, and also because it doesn't just burn something to the ground, it actually like implants a shadow into the stone forever.
So yes, but I do have I have some problems with this as well, because frankly I see this response often. Like, to be honest, I don't really think either side of this argument conducts themselves particularly well, and I've never because I don't think either side has ever really shown the requisite respect for the discussion.
Yeah.
Like, if that makes any sense. Because, I see people go oh, well, and again, I'm not going to name people specifically here, but rest assured I've seen it from very intelligent people. Go I haven't seen them condemn Dresden. I haven't seen them condemn the firebombing of Tokyo. I haven't seen... That is, come on. That's such a lazy thing to say. We're not discussing it. Bring it up. Do you want me to? I've also seen them go, oh, well, then you would need to condemn all aerial bombing of civilian targets. And I'm like, of course I condemn all bomb. You're specifically, if you're specifying a civilian target, who doesn't?
Right.
Yeah. You're saying you would be in favor of bombing civilians? oh, you haven't condemned the Nazi V5 rockets. Is there anyone defending the Nazi rockets? I've never heard anyone defend the Nazi rockets. Or even people going like, I've never heard anyone condemn Dresden. And it's like, what are you talking about? I hear Dresden condemned constantly. As well, it should be, by the way, as far as I know of Dresden. Granted, I haven't done a deep dive into it, so maybe somebody could talk me into it or something. But as far as I know of Dresden, Dresden was absolutely unjustified.
Yeah. And that's yeah, like Dresden, like, how do I want to put it? Some people bring up like factories and stuff like that, but actually the Nazis weren't losing as much factory power as people like to think. Like you have autistic German engineers going full tilt. Like it's not like you're not going to out engineer autistic Germans. Don't even try. You know, and I'm like only half joking about this sort of thing. Things like
yep.
Like it's one of those things. Like the moral of it comes down to, you know, yeah, the indiscriminate bombing of civilians is bad in our current context. But, you know, what is it worse to lose a war because of it? A war that you could win if you can bomb some civilians and save some of your lives. Like, there's a utilitarian streak throughout this argument that I just don't like. You know, the utilitarians can be rebuked by just saying, hey, let's just hook up a million rats to heroin. We'll be fine. Happiness will be increased if we, you know, induce heroin into the population.
Yep.
You know, like that's not something you can just come back from. Well, you know, utilitarianism isn't about that. You know, not that there's even people who can cogently argue utilitarianism alive. You know, well, no, it is. Like if you make a statement like happiness or something that, you know, is the greater good, therefore things should be done to maximize happiness. Things that maximize happiness can be done without a negative moral connotation. It's sort of like the baby boomer mindset. They value and hold absolute society, and society's values are personal peace and affluence. In other words, feel good, get rich. Therefore, everything that the boomers have done is morally justified within their own mind. This is an example I'm bringing up, not necessarily to bash the boomers in this particular instance. So when it comes to nuclear weapons, there's that question, right? Indiscriminate targeting of civilians. Well, I'm actually pretty satisfied that's not what happened here. I don't know if if anyone in the chat is not satisfied. If they want to type up their reasoning whenever it shows up on my screen, I'll be happy to talk about it. But with things like, you know, like the arguments from this stuff, it's very difficult to, how do I want to put it? It's hard to talk about it because I'm trying to fight an argument I fundamentally just don't believe in, and like anyone who takes it seriously is mostly, you know, not serious themselves.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing too. Like, there is a point, because we are moral people, our actions are in fact limited.
Yes.
Like, based on what versus immoral people. There are in fact things immoral people, quote unquote, can do. I mean, they can't do it either. They'll be, you know, they'll get their reward eventually. But what I mean is will do, I guess, is better, right? Immoral people will do that moral people cannot. So eventually, the answer will have to be like, no, even if it means losing the war, you can't do that. There is a point where that happens. Yeah. What is the point, though? Like, that's where it gets really difficult. I've had this conversation before where you get this with, like, you know, this 12-year-old girl was raped by her cocaine-addicted stepdaddy, and you're not going to let her get an abortion? And every single time this sort of thing pops up, it's always a hoax, or we're missing some crucial piece of the discussion. that completely changes the context. But eventually we're going to be like, so what if it isn't? Like, it's not a hoax. Okay, no, she can't get an abortion. Sorry. Yeah. Like, you can't do that because killing babies is evil. It's still evil. I don't care, right? That's Aslan. I've used Aslan is not a tame lion. Aslan is good. Aslan's not tame.
Yes.
You know, it's the same sort of thing. Like, eventually, you're going to reach a point where it's like, you know how you could win the war? You could win the war by, like, burning all of their crops. I'm just making something up, right? Yeah. Like, burning all of their crops to the ground and slaughtering their women. I mean, yeah, that would do it. And you'll lose otherwise, but you can't. You can't do that.
Yeah.
There are things that you're limited in doing. So that's where people go, like, it's consequentialism. Like, I don't think it is, but at the same time, a lot of the arguments for it end up tending that way for that reason.
Yes. And that's something difficult from, like, you know, like, not that this is like, you know, Catholic versus Protestant. We're actually pretty much united on the ideas here. But, like, in a sense of, like,
yeah,
it's hard for me to formulate certain types of arguments from this stuff, just because it's like I just don't have anywhere close to the mindset of these opinions. You know, not that, you know, bloody Missouri is an actual, like, thing or whatever, but it's, you know, it's true in a way. You know, you will always have people who are just more willing to shed blood than you are. And it's difficult to sort of communicate that without sounding like super edgy or something like that, which I don't really want to do. You know, no Fed posting here. Yep. Like with the abortion debate, quote unquote debate, you know, there's so much bad faith on the pro side that it's impossible to handle it, and on the right side, on the life side, there is you know, kind of a, like I described it, recent. I've been not crashing out, but, like, I've been bothered by the talking about secular versus religious right. What do you mean? Like, there's no separation of the right from religion. Where do you think your rank and file soldiers come from? You still need to win elections, like, you know, and religion is a weapon for that. But, you know, Braff is right when he says that there hasn't been a religious right in this country for years. Well, you know, in reality, it's all been ground forces, a leaderless army. Most of the pro-life crowd haven't been very well led. Not in the squad. You know, the squads have been great. Like, Anthony, you've told me about this. You've talked about it here. You know, like, individual people caring for the individual would-be mothers have been fantastic. The government has squashed down on them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, it's that. But, like, it's not the same when it comes to, you know, political power. The people we pressure into attacking a pro-abortion legislature aren't actually involved in the anti-abortion movement, which is, you know, obviously, you know, like, hard to wrap your mind around, because a lot of people, Megabuster Shepherd, you missed the start. All I did was talk about Yoru in an American flag bikini dropping nuclear bombs on people. Like, that is, if I was not a Christian, that would be my religion. It is the perfect summation of America. This says a lot about America, and it's a hot Japanese chick in an American flag bikini dropping nuclear weapons.
Amazing.
But when it comes to things like, you know, like political movements, it's quite frankly just not the same thing. And it's hard for people who think of politics, like especially elite theory, to understand that. Elite theory explains like 90% of everything. The thing is that it doesn't explain when the mob actually interacts with power but doesn't necessarily take power. It's like, well, yeah, the people in power, this. No, the people in power are listening to those not in power and making informed decisions in a way that your model says that they don't have to do, or at least from what the videos and readings I've done on it. And again, I mostly agree with it. So it's difficult to go over things with people on that stuff, just because it's very much like like a misunderstanding of the situation, because they're not religious people, right? So like what I'm hearing is,
Yeah,
go for it.
yeah, I completely agree with you. Like that, they're not religious people is kind of the problem, because part of the issue with this is that I want to be like, based on a weighing of the evidence, I think that the dropping of the atomic bombs might have been the best thing that we could do at the time. And find yourself on the same side as someone who goes, better a dead Jap than a dead American, right? Like, and while there is a sense this is definitely true in a war, right? That's simply not a thing that you can really accept as a Christian, when it comes to civilians versus soldiers, right? A non-combatant is a non-combatant. And say what you will about like, oh, they're trained civilians. There were babies and children who were killed by these bombs. So I guess like part of the issue here is that the dropping of the bombs, I think, in its best case, in its best interpretation, the best case, which I think is the one that we've given here, needs to be. It was an act of desperation that was being driven by the fact that there was nothing else that we could do to stop one of the most evil governments, evil societies ever since what? Like the Mesoamericans? Was the last time that we had was the last time we had a society on this level of depravity.
Yeah.
But every death is a tragedy. The fact that we may have had to do this is not something that we should be looking at and going, God bless America. Like, do it like Fujimoto, for that matter, where it's the literal personification of war doing it. I don't have a problem with what Fujimoto's doing, like, legitimately here. Like, because in a sense, he's right. Like, the fact that we did this and that we were willing to do this and that we were forced to do this, it's more of a condemnation of Imperial Japan and what Imperial Japan forced us, but it's a horrible thing that we had to do. Like, this is a tragedy and needs to be treated as such. Like, you cannot and should not be triumphalist about the dropping of the bombs. This was the horrors of the scientific age unleashed upon the world. It was an awful thing. And it's like, oh, but it saved so many American lives. No, that's the wrong way to look at it. The way that you need to look at it is, oh my God, I can't believe that we had to flatten two cities with the scientific power of the atom, burning them to death, because that was the only way to stop people from raping Chinamen to death. Like, this is the way to look at the nuclear bombs. This is not something to be proud of. It's not a moment of pride. It's a moment of deadly desperation. And also, in a sense, I do get, even if you think that in this situation the bombs were justified, in a sense, making statements going like, hey, you can't be targeting civilians is kind of the right thing to do, right? Like, because you got to make sure, like, this technology exists now.
Yep. And it's certainly one of those things that, like, will never be, how should I say it, never quite be understood by the normie. Like, like the normie can perfectly say, USA, do USA or whatever, to the nuclear bomb dropping, and winning the war should be a moment of USA, USA. But it's there's a loss of understanding with like where these things come from, what'll happen. where, how do I want to put, like, it's so hard to, because I'm trying to dumb down the idea of that there's a higher nature to these things that is intangible, but at the same time necessary to do. Like, it's throughout Pinkerton's Ghosts. Like, quite frankly, I don't believe America is ever going to come back to God without immense bloodshed, and the destruction of churches, even dead churches, to be very clear, enemy churches. But it's like, in reality, I'm a bloodshed maximalist. It is the way that God saves us from our sins and the punishment thereof. It's also, unfortunately, going to be the way to purify the country. Jehoshaphat and David did this. They threw down the high places, killed the priests of Baal, and all this other stuff. They made choices that had deadly consequences even for their own people. But because they pursued God and did it for God, it's a moment of righteousness. Did the law change? Could a president come up here and say all abortionists will be executed, in the name of God Almighty, and without trial? Would that be something that is breaking the law or fulfilling God's law? Would God be pleased by such a declaration, and of course the acting out of it? And I'm not Fed posting here. I'm saying that this would be like the president coming forth and saying this. We will no longer promote degeneracy. The casinos and strip clubs will be closed, et cetera, et cetera. Drive it underground. Like, it's like, is it worth the bloodshed? Which comes back around to the nuclear weapons. Would invading Japan be worth the bloodshed? Again, we just say no. If a grandma's coming at you with a knife, you have to kill her rather than getting stabbed yourself. The grief of them losing their grandmother who's kamikazing at you is no different than the grief that your family will experience. However, your family, has more on your soul than some random Japanese family that wants to kill you and will be praising their grandmother for her kamikaze charge. Like, it's one of those things for those who are against the nuclear bombs. Oh, they would have fallen anyway. Quite frankly, that's kind of cope. Maybe you're right. Now that we have quote unquote perfect knowledge of everything going on, um, it's hard to, like, it just keeps coming back to the wheel of is this justified, is this not justified? Quite frankly, we keep coming back to justified. Would a Cold War nuclear exchange be justified? No. If whoever launches first is in the wrong if there's no ground invasion. If there is a ground invasion, there's Japan was enough on the back foot that a not 1-2 punch could have done something. You can't really do that with Russia. They were right when that guy refused to launch missiles despite what the censors were telling him, if that's even a true story.
Yep.
We were right.
I think it is, and the reason I think it is that he was punished.
Okay. I've never thought of it that way. But yeah, all right, I'll dig it. Anyway. What am I trying to say? The moral of any war, whether spiritually or physically, is to do not with some sort of calculation of lives lost, even though we brought up that reasoning. It's to do with whether or not it pleases God. Looking at what it would have to cost, I think that the nuclear weapons are more on the pleases God side of things than not. For the stuff I described earlier, like the kamikaze and grandmas, having to perform war crimes because your enemy is literally throwing preschoolers at you or something, is no way to live, and not justifiable. God's more angry at the person who threw their preschooler in with a suicide vest, but at the same time, you still had to shoot a kid. that would have created, I personally think that would have created America into a monster rather than, what it is now. Which is still monstrous, but in a different way. Like it would have been an imperial monster rather than a liberal, soft power monster. Because what are you going to do when you have 1 million troops occupying Japan and every single one of them has committed 10 war crimes just for a foot of ground? And not good
Yep.
ground either. Like they would come back and they'd raise hell. For the guilt, for the pain, for the just the general nature of things. And it's very much lost on people, that moral complement. I was witnessing to a girl, and I was talking to her about art. Oh, I love God. Yeah, sure. But I've got videos of I was shown videos of you partying, and you are certainly not over 21, young lady. But there's sorry, I just turning into an old man is funny to me. But with things like this, talking to her, my goal wasn't necessarily like I gave her the gospel, but like my goal wasn't just to like give her the words of Jesus Christ died for your sins. Everyone hears those words multiple times in their lives. It's like an invitation left out on a counter to a party, right? Like God describes the marriage supper of the Lamb like, it's a big party, all like a wedding feast and all this jazz. That's why we call it the wedding supper. You're going to have these new clothes and you're invited to the king's, house and everything like that. And it's like anyone can pick that up. Like anyone can look over and take the invitation and act on it, following the instructions of the invitation, to accept the finished work of Christ. So I don't sound like I'm preaching works-based salvation. Uh, um, get on that tightrope, theologian. Anyone could pick it up, but the thing is, they have to, one, understand the invitation, two, understand the writing of the invitation, three, understand that the invitation is something that they can follow. Welcome back, Anthony. Understand that the invitation is something they can follow, and 1,000 other little things. Like you can't just like go up to someone and say you're a sinner. If you get the wrong type of person, they'll say something like, it, baby, $50 and I can make you a sinner too. Like it's like you don't want to follow that path. But like, what can you do with that stuff then? What is your choices? What sort of, like how can you witness to someone like that? Well, you honestly just can't. Like you can talk to them and maybe, they'll let down their armor. It's whatever the spirit allows, But, if you're talking to someone who's more in the prime of life, beautiful, thinks she loves God, enjoying every moment of it, having great time, many people are fawning over her for her beauty, and there's some crazy old ass asshole just talking to her about God. Like who do you think she's going to fall to? Not the old ass guy. So it's like you have to explain things to people. You have to push them in a certain way. You have to make them realize that they're sinners, that they have and they honestly will realize it within themselves, that they have value as a soul, that they have a soul, that there will be an afterlife, and not just like say they do, make it real. Which is difficult. Like it's a whole path people have to take. And there's a reason why deathbed conversions are a thing. Most people live their lives just not thinking about it, not considering it, not desiring God, and believing that they're perfectly fine without him. It's a tragedy, of course, but like sending 50,000 people mostly to hell. Did God arrange for the Catholic churches to be in there so it wasn't a total like loss to hell? like, that path leads to madness, but it's not even something he's incapable of or even wouldn't do. Like, there's a million little things that, like, to consider with it, but they don't um start with some sort of, like, mentally deranged utilitarian talking about the amount of lives. Truman was probably thinking about that and doing the equations because, despite the memes, he actually did live like a bloody Missourian. Um, he was one of the last people to fire shells during World War One. Like, you don't just do that, if you know what I mean. And there's many
Yep.
signs that he was, in fact, especially if you listen to Razorfist's documentary about Joe McCarthy, which is a very true thing. The signs that he was not, maybe not a communist sympathizer, but he was unwilling to purge his ranks of communists. Um, except for a few. So it's who he was willing to give up. So it's with with these things, like, it seems like we're talking about different stuff, but really what we're doing is we're fumbling around the subject of the elephant of morality, what the morality of these events mean for the people involved. Um,
Yeah,
it,
and go ahead. You finish your thought. I thought you were pausing.
Yeah, and I'm just going to finish up kind of what I'm thinking about, and, like, with celebrating it, it's even harder to sort of, like, lay that claim down. It was necessary, it was a hard thing, but the problem is that, like, while we sober men of the West, practically, as well educated as theologians of some centuries, like, what are we, looking at things with the benefit of perfect enough hindsight? It's like, what can we, say? What would Thomas Aquinas say? When he surely heard about his king going, St. Louis going out on crusade. Did he condemn it? I don't think so.
No, no, he wouldn't have. The Crusades were generally considered to be just wars at the time. He didn't codify just war. Augustine had already done a lot of what are war. So remember that, like, when you talk about just war,
Hold on,
am I
Anthony.
there or no? I'm back.
You're here.
Yeah. Okay. When you talk about just war in Catholic theology, what you're really doing is people go, like, this is a very common thing where you go, like, I just go, where's that in the Bible? I just go by the Bible, and, like, sure, okay, but, like, what it actually is supposed to be are, like, scriptural and moral principles for when it would be okay to fight a war, and, like, I guess you could disagree with it. I think that they're pretty smart. Yeah. But the point being, like, the Crusades, generally speaking, were considered to be just wars. I mean, each one does need to be taken on its own merits, I suppose. I think the First Crusade is uncontroversially a just war. Uh, into each one individually, which I haven't done. I've only really looked at the Crusade, so I couldn't tell you. But the
Yeah, and it's like, world.
as I,
Anthony, you're breaking up.
it says connect. I know.
It's probably just a road you're on. Let's give it. I'll talk for a minute or two, and then we'll try again. It's like, we know that World War II had some shady stuff going on, but from the level of the people actually in the trenches fighting it, it was a fairly just war. There's always excuses and carte blanche, and the liberal order always overthinks things. But fundamentally, the only thing that really made it unjust, in my opinion, is the fact that we didn't go after the Soviet Union since they also invaded Poland at the same time.
I'm here, by the way.
Okay, you can't. Did you hear my point?
I did, yes, and
Yeah.
I agree with you. I've been watching some of like Zoomer Historian because he's been recommended. Do you know him or no?
I can't. No.
Okay, interesting channel. He has some good stuff on Rwanda, but he's been posting a lot of like pro-German, pro-Hitler, pro-Nazi stuff, like, which, honestly, kudos for the balls. But, right, like,
Right.
in the year of our Lord 2020, in the year of our Lord 2025, kudos. With that said, I haven't found him to be particularly convincing because, like, the bottom line is, if you read Mein Kampf, Hitler was a lunatic who did have to be stopped. Like, Mein Kampf is very clear what his long-term goals were. There's, like, I don't really think that there's an argument against it. Sorry, and I know, like, people, he's also very much in the camp of, like, Churchill was a warmonger and a monster, and I'm like, I don't know. I'm undecided at the very least, but
I think people exaggerate
I'm not
Churchill quite a bit.
I'm not convinced anyway. Yeah, but point is, like, if you were to ask me point blank, even now after listening to some of this stuff, like, I would say World War II was a just war still. I haven't taken that pill yet. I haven't taken that red pill yet, which people will, try and be like, no, you got to take the Nazi red pill. Like, what? But I'm not really capable of doing it. It reminds me, this is weird, and I mentioned this on, like, John's blog, but, like, this is going to sound like it's out of left field, but it reminds me of the Alex Rider book, Scorpia. Teenage James Bond guy, right? In the book, like, there's a whole thing of, like, is MI6 really the bad guy? Because they've been pretty, and it's true that throughout the books they've been extremely morally shady, right? Like, they've been very, very, very shady to
Yes.
right, like, to Alex throughout the series. And in book 5, Alex finally kind of cracks under the pressure when he learns that his father was part of a terrorist group called Scorpia, and he joins Scorpia, reasoning that, like, who's to say that they're not, that they're any worse than MI6. And he joins them until he's recaught by MI6 in the middle of the book. And then Scorpia's plan is revealed, which is that because a mad businessman paid them a bunch of money, they are going to murder all of the school children in London. And MI6 is trying to stop them. And then they're like, that's Scorpia. Like, this is MI6. It's like, you can hate us all we want, but we're not Scorpia. That's kind of my attitude towards World War II, where it's like, I understand and I get it that, like, yeah, there are a lot of there are a lot of things going on where you go like, oh, the Allies could be morally questionable. Okay, yeah, but who are we fighting? Like, we're fighting Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany. And sure, you're right, the Soviets were absolutely as or more evil than Nazi Germany, and we could easily have fought against them. But nevertheless, the one who invaded first and the one who was doing the invading at the time was Hitler. Like, I don't know what we're really supposed to do there. So, yeah, it's... When we're discussing the morality of the actions, if I had to give, like, a sort of takeaway point to this, it would be that, like, when we look back on the use of the atom bomb, I think that we need to avoid hey, if you think that it was okay, you're a consequentialist who is in favor of killing civilians, you nutcase. And we need to avoid a sort of equal and opposite error where it turns into, like, hey, you're, if you don't oppose the bomb, then you're okay with letting Americans die, or even more like, or better a dead Jap than a dead American. Count the lives. There's less dead Americans, therefore, right decision. Both of these things are, I think, the wrong way of looking at, in reality, when you look at the historical situation of it, must have been an unbelievably sobering decision for everyone, right? Like, we're in a situation when we're at war with an incredibly hostile power, an incredibly evil power, where if we do anything besides that, it's going to lead to tremendous loss of life. And we need to decide, like, okay, how do we, what's the thing that we can do that will prevent the worst things from happening? And when you go like, well, maybe it's dropping the bomb, that should be a matter of where you like go, oh my God, how did we reach this point? Like, it's not something that you should or could really look at and be like, yeah, it's not okay, I guess is how I would put it, right? It's not okay. It was not an okay situation that we did that. And after it was done, it should not be looked at in any way but as a tragedy, as like, this is the hand that we were forced to. This is the situation that we ended up in. This is what we had to do, and it's awful. It's awful that it led to this, and we should be doing everything in our power to make sure it doesn't happen again. I am about to walk into my apartment, so speak and for like a couple minutes.
Sure thing. One moment.
I don't know. While Ben prepares himself, I will entertain the masses.
No need.
Dun,
No
dun,
need.
dun.
No, send
Cool.
the clown away. Send the clown away.
Get out.
Yep. So, yeah, and that's like we've said it. Like, what can you do when a gamma comes up to you and goes, actually, Minecraft was revolutionary for what? It's treatment of the Jews. And not like, as a piece of like a guy describing how he'd propagandize his nation into different things and all this jazz. Like there's a million things you could talk about. And yeah, there was the vehicle of hating the Jews, but that's it. That's your point. It's like people were pretty okay with it. There are carved murals, not just paintings from masters, but carved stone murals about Simon of Trent, Saint Simon of Trent. I don't think people were in any way confused about such matters. America was dealing with its Jewish mafia at the time, including some very, very famous Jewish characters. You also had 1,000 little things that were going on that I don't really want to talk about at this time about this stream. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of marks about different things happening in different cities, different events that went on, things that were done or that at least they were accused of, that everyone does not dispute. Like that's it. Like the gamma pointing out something that was well known in the past but seems very destructive or obstructive or makes him feel like a special little boy, like that sort of thing, doesn't really lead to good conversations or reasonable outcomes for everyone involved. Like what can I do with somebody who just sort of just sort of like forces their way into it? I think that it would be more moral to lose 1 million U.S. soldiers to kill the Japanese because doing they targeted a Catholic cities is not something that leads anywhere to any discussion. Like there's a lost amount of utility. Like it's kind of how most of the atheists are completely just nonsense these days. I want it. Because they don't have any good arguments, and even those strong arguments have just been defeated time and time again, and they've lost even their intelligence. But dealing with these sort of gammas about everything, it's just unnecessary. Like some of the things that like the trials at Nuremberg were bad, really bad. Like I've only heard Jewish sources about Nuremberg, and even they complain. not that strange for them, but there's a lot of things that just, like, what are we supposed to talk about? It was a trial. Anyone can read the minutes. Everyone should read the minutes. If they are interested in such things. It's hard to care deeply about so much of this stuff, uh, because it's just time and time and time again having to deal with um, somebody's special important opinion. In reality, this stream was dedicated and is still dedicated to one thing: the morality of dropping the nuclear bombs. And the conclusion that we've come to is they were moral. um, there's if there weren't any military targets in the city, if Japan hadn't ordered all its civilians to die for the glory of Japan, if these different things hadn't, if they didn't have Unit 731, if they weren't cartoonishly evil, maybe we would have an easier time of it or something. I don't know how. Like, it's like one of those things where sometimes I read 731 and I'm like, there's got to be some sort of exaggeration. I've never looked deeply enough in to discover the source of the information, um, but it's very much one of those things where um, hmm, a lot of information could be lost or faked, but at the same time, I know how Asians interact with each other. I was friends with a Vietnamese guy for the longest time. How they just talk about other Asians, how casually racist they are, and I don't mean like I don't go down to East St. Louis kind of racist. I mean like special words racist, invented specifically for it. Nothing unusual per se, but it's like, you know, that's pretty impressive as a connoisseur myself. Uh, yeah, you know, it's like there's no real flaw in the argument except for people saying what ifs and offering perfect information. If someone offers you perfect information, well, guess what? You can make a perfect decision. Um, Horrible but sadly necessary. Like with stuff like Nuremberg was inevitable. It was going to happen one way or the other. They had to maintain moral superiority, and the powerful Jewish contingent had to have their vengeance in one way or another. Um, Unfortunately, it also encouraged the Mossad to do things, and their vengeance on Nazi heroes in places like Argentina led them to do what they do to America every day. It's like there's a consequence of actions, to bring back the word consequence, that you can see traced out. Okay, so now that we have perfect knowledge, do I even need to complete the sentence? Well, the answer is, guess what? It's too late. You know, we're not going to turn back the time on that. And even if somebody was willing to in power, they're not going to make it. Either they're going to get assassinated, or smart people will actually, keep them from actual lovers of power. We can look back with perfect hindsight all day, every day, and quite frankly, um, it's just never going to be any sort of satisfying, and it's never going to be any sort of intelligent. It's never going to be any sort of way to actually determine the truth of what God wants and how God wants us to act. God has perfect knowledge, but he knows we have imperfect knowledge. He judges us not based on perfect knowledge that we may or God judges us not on imperfect knowledge or perfect knowledge that he has but we don't have, but specifically on the knowledge that we have at the time, making the moral decision. The Jews running the money changing tables at the temple knew they were in the wrong. The Sanhedrin knew they were in the wrong with the illegal trial of Jesus, or with the trials of Paul and Peter and all the other saints of Stephen, Saint Stephen. Um, like there's a certain knowledge there that crime, is not just that they killed the Son of God, but also that they broke their own laws to do it. They knew that they tried to perjure him, for Pete's sake. Bringing in perjuring witnesses, paying off the guards to lie. Like, it just doesn't end. Like the that is bad. If St. Louis decided to do something sinful, he knew better. His mother instructed him, and he had Thomas Aquinas himself in his court. Like he even though he was very a competent scholar of his own right, it's very clear that there's a reason why he had Thomas Aquinas in his court, and it wasn't just for decoration. It's even things like Henry VIII, like the people want to go back. Oh, it was just Henry VIII. It was just Henry VIII wanting to divorce his wife. That was it. That was the whole thing for the English Reformation. My dude, and I'm not speaking to Anthony here, right? I'm just speaking in general. My dude, how in the world would a nation of priests, of educated men with some of the best education in the world, who constantly got into religious debates in ways that were, like Rome had to show up and moderate and all this stuff, Wycliffe and all these other guys, did the Protestants spring from the ground like myrmidons, fully formed with Protestant opinions? No. People may not have been okay with the divorce thing, but the separation from Rome was, painful in some ways, but a lot less painless than people imagine in another. And it wasn't just from top-down fiat. There's documents going all the way back to the 6th century that basically goes, Rome's too far away. We're just going to deal with it ourselves. St. Patrick has things that differ with Rome. Like the like things people talk about, these gammas who are trying to rewrite history into their own image of what things should be. Like you have to choose their villains. Like a Catholic going, oh, it was just all Henry VIII that perverted fatso. Like, sure, fine, but it wasn't all Henry VIII, because how do you explain millions of people leaving the religion of their ancestors like a pagan discovering Christianity? Well, John Knox converted all of Scotland by himself, more or less. How does that happen? Well, it was, he just was very convincing, and he was the king, and he threatened people. Bull honky. He didn't threaten Scotland for shit. Pardon my language, for this stuff. But it's like, no, he didn't do half of it. The English Reformation was already well on its way. That there were already rumblings of discontent, that there had been for centuries discontent with Rome. Not in the way that everyone's, oh, we're going to leave Rome anytime now, but in the sense of dissenting theologians and scholars, and a certain amount of free thinking with theology, including things like sola scriptura. There was a reason why Wycliffe was translating the Bible into English. Why did the English people suddenly jump into Reformation mode just because the king wanted a new womb to shoot some seed into? Right? Like, that's what it comes down to with this divorce stuff for Henry VIII. Sorry, this has been frustrating me for a bit. But it's like, you can't be a gamma about history and then be like, well, it makes sense, like the argument that Catherine of Aragon was a Habsburg agent is more logical than you saying that King Henry was the only reason for the English Reformation. It's frustrating, because it's just, you can't argue with these people. Not that you should, really, but it's like dealing with this stuff that people bring up again and again and again. What can you do? And Megabuster Shepherd makes a great point. The Counter Reformation came too late. So, in other words, there wasn't any great way to correct it. Mary, Queen of Scott, Mary, and by the way, that's another counter. If Catholic Mary couldn't reconvert the nation, how in the world can you say that the religion matters from the top down? No. So it's like one of those things, like as a proxy argument for people against the nuclear drop of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Uh, is this sort of litmus test you can do? Okay, here is another historical example. Can you explain it? And then you listen to their explanation. Does it make sense? Do they have a reasonable grasp on history? If somebody says the only reason for the Nazis was the Jews, that's completely bull honky. It wasn't just the Jews. It was Weimar. It was the Versailles Treaty. It was, even though they were fairly villainous in World War One, especially compared to, France, Belgium, England, Austria, has a little bit more of the blame, but they didn't get punished as hard as Germany. Like there's a million little things around it, including just ethnic resentment within Europe between these different groups. You can say something pithy and make a video on TikTok about it that will make people feel smart and give you some brownie points in a couple of virality minutes where your information will be chewed up, given an AI voiceover to, and then reposted on YouTube forever. Get yourself a Reddit gold, friend. But the long and short of these things is that you can always bring back things to truth and then argue, from a quote unquote God's eye perspective. And I mean that in the sense of what is the morality of such a thing? Like what are the standards? God's standards are clear to know. He talks about it. He's not against war. He talks about himself as a warrior king all the time. Well, throughout the New Testament and Old Testament, it's one of the final acts in Revelation, and one of the first things in the Bible is a prophecy about stomping on the heel of the serpent. That's not a peaceful thing. God kills a sheep and clothes them with the wool. It's anyway. You back, Anthony?
I'm back.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm schizo ranting. You may, of course, talk about the English Reformation too, if you want. But I think my point is fairly standalone, I guess. Mm.
Yeah, I don't really want to. Sorry. To be
Sure.
honest with you, the reason I don't want to is that would switch the discussion to a Protestant versus Catholic, and in a way that I'm not interested in having. Just like
Fair.
no. So I'll let you have your schizo rant. Yeah, no, I'm pretty good. I've made my point about the atom bombs. My main thing is like I don't like the state of the discourse around them. I don't think it makes me uncomfortable to even talk about it, because it's like I don't know who I agree with. And even there are people who are like fundamentally agree with the things that I've said, and then they'll say something and I'll go, no, that's a terrible point. Like, why would you say that?
Right.
And that happens like all the time. It's like, yeah, I think, I like, I'll go like, I guess that the atom bombs had to be dropped, but man, it was bad. And people go like, I agree. Ever notice that nobody talks about Dresden? They'll be like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like nobody was talking about Dresden. Yeah, like, and how come they don't condemn the firebombing of Tokyo? What do you mean? Because we weren't talking about the firebombing of Tokyo. And it's like, why are you doing this? So I don't know.
Yeah.
And I also like, I sort of get the direction that the Catholic Church went in afterward. I think, in a sense, they were like right to do so, because it's like, now that this technology exists in the world, you got to be very clear. Like, we can't justify it,
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to be very clear. Like, all right, this technology exists. It was used once. That's over. You can't target civilians. Like, you can't do that.
Not even a little.
All right, a little. No.
As a treat.
Just as a treat. Just if you do a good job, you can target a few civilians.
Oh, thanks, Anthony.
Megabuster Shepherd says it, meaning the English Reformation, was 500 years ago. Kind of a dead topic. I mean, true, but we are sometimes a history podcast, so it's not so much that it's a dead topic, and more that it's just a discussion I'm not interested in having right now, and probably not qualified to have anyway. Also, he says, have they not seen the Bomber Harris memes? I haven't. I'm Googling it. Bomber. Is that referring to H Bomber guy?
No, it's a reference to the bombing of Dresden.
I'm looking at Bomber Harris was a war hero, not a criminal. History defended. It's the first thing I see pop up. Amazing. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, no, I've made my point. I'm good. In other news for listeners, we are making progress on the animatic.
Yep.
So that's cool.
We have a meeting about it Tuesday,
Yep.
God willing, and we'll go from there. It's happening. I'll make a post about it probably online relatively soon. I'm going off on vacation. We will still stream on Sunday, maybe. Actually, no, we'll take a break next Sunday.
Yeah, and I mean, I could probably do it from the car, but I would be in a different car than normal, so it would be kind of difficult. We'll take a 1 week break.
Yeah, and it's anyway. Thank you as always, guys, for joining us. We do appreciate you. We will, quite frankly, the animatic and the vacation and some other things going on in my life, job changes and such, have taken up a lot of brain power, but I'm getting back on writing Fingerden's Ghost episodes. And you're going to see more content from us very soon. I'm going to be doing shorts as well. I'm just going to try and fill your lives with my voice as much as possible. You will love my voice. You will put up pictures where my eyes follow you, wherever you are in your room, and I'll have even a speaker box that will tell you my opinions whenever you don't want to hear them. But until then, have
specifically
a good night,
only when you don't want to.
I'll know. Like, you'll be with your wife, and I. Oh.
Start playing mood music and suddenly come out. So about the Jews.
Listen, don't stop on my account, but those Jews.
Joke's on you. I'm into